we got to blow up our definition of grace. Otherwise, we're sitting around with a pathetic view of grace that really doesn't match up with the scriptures.
If we're married to grace, then why in the world are we still flirting with legalism? Talk about it with Andrew Farley on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. You always have a place at our table. We just don't let you talk. It's going to be a great program, and you're going to like it.
Whether you want to or not.
Surprise, we're going to be talking about grace. In case you're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter is here. Matthew says, and he's our executive producer, he says everybody talks about how poor communication leads to bad relationships, but nobody talks about how it leads to bad haircuts.
It's true. It happens. What? You go to Great Clips and they get done, you're like, oh, great.
Is that what I said? What if you don't cut your hair?
I'll look into it.
Well, speaking of that, our producer Jinx is in his little glass booth. I'm not sure Jinx remembers even what a haircut is. and our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker.
Getting a haircut.
John says AI will never replace humans until it can look busy while doing nothing. Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. I don't want to say George is getting older, but when he was younger, Old Spice was just called Spice. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of our broadcast. Kathy hasn't brought any baked goods in weeks, and Matthew has lost 20 pounds.
Oh, no.
Not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence.
No, it really isn't.
Fading away.
We've got a great guest and one of my favorite people, Andrew Farley. He's the president of Grace Message, and he serves as lead pastor of the Grace Church in Texas, a church I would join, and he would be my pastor if we lived closer. He also hosts the Grace Message, a live call-in radio program airing weeknights across the country. You ought to go. We'll give you some information later, and you can find out if it's in your area, and you'll love it. He's also a best-selling author of 9 books, including The Grace Message, The Naked Gospel, and Twisting Scripture or Twisted Scripture, and his latest book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is Gospel Zero, Reclaiming the Radical Message of Grace. I expect during this program, Andrew, to get some answers to a question I've had my whole ministry. I was teaching at a conference, and I'd been teaching that God isn't angry at his own people. And during the question and answer period, a guy raised his hand and he said, Dr. Brown, I think he is angry. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, and I'm glad. I said, you're really kidding. And he said, because that's what keeps me obedient. And I said, not only are you not kidding, and I said in a pastoral way, sir, you're a fruitcake. There's something wrong with you. But I see that all the time. I really do. When I first started, when I really thought God was calling me to talk mostly about grace and mercy, I thank God I was not Tony Campolo. I mean, I don't want to do what my late friend did. Man, all he did was make people feel guilty, and I didn't have to do that. And I thought people are going to love me. they're gonna rise up and call me blessed. And they didn't. They criticized and they threw rocks and they went after me. And I never understood.
Yeah.
Andrew, why?
Fix it, Andrew.
Well, Steve, first of all, let me say it's great to be with you guys. I always suffer a little bit from Steve Brown hilarity syndrome when I'm away from you, and I'm glad to be back. You guys are amazing. This thing has been 2,000 years old, this problem. So we got people that are mad at grace, angry at grace, frustrated when you say it's that easy. But I gotta say, I agree with you. Scaring Christians is not ministry. And I think people imagine that if they go away from a church service scared out of their wits, or, God was really coming down on them hard today, they could feel the presence of the Spirit pressing down on them, and, oh my goodness, God beat me up pretty good today, then they think that's a fiery, good sermon that inspires people. But you crack open the Bible, and actually what you discover is Titus chapter 2, the grace of God teaches us to say no to sin. And so my take is there's a whole lot of messages out there that are scaring Christians, but scaring Christians is not ministry, Steve.
Oh, man, do I agree. By the way, at the end of this book, and this is something I'm going to copy and paste on my computer, there is piles and piles and piles of verses that you ought to read and memorize because they point to the central message of Scripture. Or they all left? There was a time when I was a pastor and I really thought, I was to preach convicting sermons and that I was responsible for their goodness and their obedience. And then I found out I wasn't doing any good. They were worse. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I think I was kind of driven for my own sake and for the sake of the congregation to grace. Do you get criticized? I mean, you make me look like a Pharisee. Do people go after you?
Oh, my goodness, Steve. Yes, absolutely. I mean, definitely every single day we're getting somebody that's saying, well, where's the obedience? Why don't you balance grace with truth? And you just want to hit the pause button and say, wait a minute, the truth is we're under grace. And, you don't need a balance because by grace, he gave you an obedient heart. And when people see grace and obedience as like opposites or grace and truth as like opposites that you need to balance, you just go, wait a minute, what is your view of grace? Maybe your view of grace is so puny that you think it's just a get out of jail free card. Well, my view of grace is that God ripped your heart out by grace and he replaced it by grace and he lives in you by grace and he empowers you every day by grace. So we got to blow up our definition of grace. Otherwise, we're sitting around with a pathetic view of grace that really doesn't match up with the scriptures. So I think there's a whole lot of rethinking to do. Yes, people are going to hurl accusations at us. But look, the book of Romans still stands. And here's what it says. Apart from the law, sin is dead. So don't you want sin to be dead in your life? Well, it's only dead one way. And that is apart from the law, sin is dead. There you have it.
I generally tell them in a pastoral way I'm praying for their deaths because they're causing real problems in the church. One of the things I love probably as much as anything in my life is to watch a light come on because it is the gospel. And, I just love seeing people go, you're kidding. Is that true? I mean, that can't be true. And it is true. I mean, when people get it, if they're Baptists, they dance. If they're Presbyterians, they smile.
Right.
If they're Lutherans, they speak in tongues. It's just interesting to see the reactions, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, again and again, people think that Christianity is supposed to be like a headache where you got to have it, but it's killing you. And then, people like you come along and we got this message of, wow, it's better than you possibly could imagine. It's off the charts. There's no fly in the ointment to ruin it. There's no worm in the apple to kill it. I mean, this thing is incredible. And that's why people were willing to be dragged from their homes and tortured and killed. The average Christian today, I mean, basically they think, well, Christianity is a behavior improvement program. It's a sin management system, and I don't even think we realize how miserable we've made it. But that was the first sin. The first sin in the garden was sin management. It was behavior improvement. It was, look, I want to know good from evil so that I can do a bunch of good and avoid a bunch of evil. And basically, we've fashioned God into Santa Claus today. He's making a list and he's checking it twice, but he's not handing out gifts. He's handing out guilt trips. And it's sad because the Christianity is a whole lot better than that. And lastly, I'll just say, look at Jesus's promise. My yoke is easy. Well, we're scared of the word easy. Please don't say easy. That's easy believism, people will say. Well, that's what Jesus described it as. He said, believe in me, and he says it's easy and light.
Guys, what we're doing is what Martin Luther said to do. He said we got to speak the good news to each other or we'll get discouraged. And believe me, I have a tendency to discouragement. And so I need this more than you do. So that's why Andrew is on this program so often. The book is Gospel Zero, Reclaiming the Radical Message of Grace. And it's far more radical than you think it is. So glad you're here. We know how busy you are and that you would take time. What they haven't told you is that when you do, you get 3 free sins. And if you watch 3 in a row, you get 15 free sins.
Oh, my goodness.
But what we're talking about on this broadcast is that they're all free. They're not absolutely free. They've just been paid for by the one who loved you enough to do that for you. We're talking to Andrew Farley, and his latest book is called Gospel Zero, Reclaiming the Radical Message of Grace.
Andrew, just as a quick follow-up to what you were saying before the break, I wanted to ask you a quick question. Is the process of understanding... Well, I already know the answer. The process to understanding grace, I don't think is necessarily a light bulb moment. I think it's something that is a process that happens. I mean, I think you can have a light bulb moment where you say, oh, wow, well, maybe I need to look into that. But I was in a church for a number of years that would definitely say that it was a grace church. The messages from the pastor were very definitely grace-oriented. And there was something came up at one point in time, and I was in a meeting. And after the meeting was over, an elder said to me, Kathy, I think you need to understand that we are a grace church, but we are certainly not radical grace. And I said, if we're not radical grace, I said, first of all, grace is radical. And if we're not a radical grace church, then I'm in the wrong church. And I did eventually, and it was the only church I've ever left in my life, other than for geographical reasons, because I moved, that I felt like I had to leave because I thought they're not getting it all the way. So I think it's and he may very well have come to a point later on down the road where he said to himself, oh, wow, you know what? This really is radical. But
no, he didn't. I know him.
But
No,
anyway, I do think that it's a process. And I think there are a lot of people out there who maybe think that they understand it, but they don't really get the depth of it. And when I say that, I'm not saying that I do, because I fall back all the time too. But
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So here's what I would say to that. First, there are people that categorize grace. They say, well, yeah, grace. I've graduated from grace. Grace is awesome. Grace is for salvation. Grace is how you get to heaven. Grace
Hmm.
means everything is free in terms of new real estate someday and the pearly gates and all of that. Well, thank you so much for grace. Now I'm moving on to the Christian life, and that's a common attitude, but for those who want to dive deeper and really deepen their understanding of God's grace, I would say if you're looking for an approach, well, I would call the approach the new covenant. And I would say, here's pillar number one. Pillar number one is you got to dive deep into your forgiveness. And you got to realize God has no scorecard. He's keeping no record of your wrongs. And he's removed them as far as the east is from the west, past, present, future, you're forgiven. So get to know that truth in the Bible. Number two, get to know that you're close to God, that Jesus bought your closeness. Through the blood, you've been brought near. It's not through your Bible study. Bible study's awesome. It's not through your quiet time. It's not through your church attendance. It's not through giving money. Jesus bought your closeness. And so knowing that you're close. So clean and close are number one and two on those pillars. Then number three, you're living under grace. Really, please believe that God's grace is the motivator. He loves you. He likes you. You're not going to be motivated by guilt. That hasn't been working. Look, you've been sinning just fine already. So how about you try grace? And then number four is identity. Stop believing you're a dirty worm. God is not calling you a dirty worm, and you shouldn't either. You're a child of God. You got a new heart. So recognize who he's made you to be. You were crucified and raised. You're a new person. So that's grace. Grace is forgiveness. Grace is identity. Grace is freedom. And grace is closeness to God, knowing that he caused it. And I think when we realize that, then we say, oh, I do have a journey. I mean, there's a process. There's an adventure. I don't know it all. And so, Lord, I'm going to dive in, and I want you to teach me how good you really are.
Oh, that is so good. You know, I was thinking, the people that I know who really get what you're saying, I can't think of a single exception. They all want to be better than they are, not to get anything.
Yeah.
They just have been loved so deeply, they want to please somebody who would love them. I do. I don't do it very often, but you never met anybody that wants to please God more than I do, or is more thankful that when I don't, it's okay.
I believe that. I believe that with all my heart, and I love that you said that, because people throw stones and they think, oh my goodness, all those grace believers out there are doing a bunch of secret sinning. And really what we're saying is, look, we were doing plenty of sinning before. We've actually fallen in love with Jesus, and we are not interested in sin. You nailed it. I mean, oh my goodness, if God is this good, then I'm not scared of him anymore, and I want to get to know him. And I'm looking forward to it eagerly because he never disappoints me. And oh my goodness, to walk by the Spirit and trust him and bear fruit, that's what we're all about.
Oh, yeah.
Andrew, you give some insight into like the Sermon on the Mount. And for that person that thinks, I not only, I'm supposed to avoid killing somebody, I can't even hate him, or I'm not supposed to just avoid adultery, I can't even, live through lust. Talk some about that. What's going on? What's Jesus teaching there?
Yeah, so some people kind of teach the Sermon on the Mount like it's a sweet passage for Christian growth. Let me pat you on the back and tell you, boy, you're 75% there and you're doing fantastic. But really, I mean, Jesus is basically showing up at base camp. Imagine Mount Everest, and people are at base camp at the bottom, and they're beating their chests and they're bragging and all that. And Jesus shows up and says, hey, what are you guys celebrating? What's the party for? You're nowhere near the top of Mount Everest. You're still at base camp, and you don't even have the right equipment to get to the top. You're a joke. You're a joke. And then he says, look up there. That's the peak. That's the standard. And that's what he's doing in the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard, don't commit adultery, but I tell you, don't even look. You've heard, don't kill people. Well, congratulations. You haven't killed anybody lately. Bravo. But when you get angry, it's the same as murder. So he's changing the standard. He's raising the bar, and that is to drive us to grace. So don't expect a pat on the back from the Sermon on the Mount. It's a killer sermon, and that's the whole point.
That's a relief. I've been working so hard trying to live up to the Sermon on the Mount, and I've been able to fake it, so some people thought I was. And now
Steve,
I find out that's not the point.
Well, let me say, Steve, you've been faking it, but I can see you never chopped your hands off, and you didn't pluck your eyes out yet either.
No, but I just didn't have the courage. I just want you to know. Hey, the book by Andrew Farley and his friend John Lynch, Gospel Zero, claiming the radical message of grace. Thanks for being with us. We're talking to pastor and author Dr. Andrew Farley. By the way, you can keep up with him at andrewfarley.org and on social media at Dr. Andrew Farley.
Andrew, I want to dive back into the content, but before that, I just have to ask about the approach of the book. When I first started reading it, I'm like, this is a different book from Andrew. There's a different vibe. You took a certain premise, the way you approached it and structured it. But secondarily, just there's a levity, there's a sense of humor to it that is really fresh and endearing. Every one of the openings of the chapters. Here's one example: to the holy hands of hypocrisy and their fearful followers. A lot of alliterative touches there. Talk about the approach on the whole book you did.
Yeah, so I mean, Gospel Zero is what if the apostles were alive today? What if they had social media accounts? What if they had podcast deals? What would they be tweeting out? They'd be dropping truth bombs left, right, and center. And, they'd basically be hashtagging grace, not guilt, and all of that. And so we're saying, what if they were writing fiery letters to the church of today? Would they be upset? Would they be happy with us? Would they praise us? Would they chastise us? What would be on their hearts? So Gospel Zero is exactly that. It's a series of letters. Think of it like the book of Galatians on steroids, aimed right at the American church and beyond. So, you foolish Americans, who has bewitched you? That kind of thing. And the bottom line is it's all about pointing out hypocrisy in religion today, and it's about encouraging people to fix their eyes on Jesus, that there really is an authentic gospel. Let's get back to ground zero, Gospel Zero. Let's rethink where we've gone. We had a Reformation a long time ago, but maybe it's time for a new one as we refine the gospel and get back to what Jesus really intended. So I wrote it with John Lynch. John is hilarious. The two funniest people I know who are proclaiming the gospel are Steve Brown and John Lynch. And so you guys, I'll be candid with you. I mean, the way you guys do your program and do your ministry, I mean, you gave me a bird's eye view of what it's like to be hilarious and to minister to people at the same time. And that's what we're doing in Gospel Zero. John Lynch is a dramatic actor, and he's a storyteller. And he and I worked for months and months to get this book just right. And I'm proud of it. I'm super excited. I've never been part of a book that's this funny and this fun. and I think people are going to love it.
Okay, we did.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, circling back to something we talked about earlier is this idea of that the gospel is not just for non-Christians. It's not just, oh, I get it, now I move on to the next thing. We had somebody on a couple weeks ago who was a Christian, was a pastor for a long time, and got into a real dark place and was suicidal, literally suicidal, and came to a point where he realized, wait, the gospel is still for me. And it really changed everything, as simple as that is. How do we miss that? Why do we miss that?
Well, sometimes I do think we have to fail. I mean, you're mentioning a guy who falls, skins his knees. He's got to get back up and live life. And how's he going to do that? What does God think of him? We got people asking all the time on the Grace Message program, am I all washed up? Did I commit one too many sins? Is God done with me? What does God think of me? And I'll just be candid. I think church today, in a lot of places, I mean, we're really good at entertaining people. We got smoke rolling out on stage. We got horses. We got Harleys going down the center aisle. We got series based on Hollywood movies and streaming TV programs. We've gotten really good at entertaining people. The problem is somebody is in that type of place for 10 years or 50 years, and they still don't know the gospel. Like, they know how to get to heaven, but they're still wondering, is God mad at me? What does God think of me? What's the final judgment going to be like? Am I going to be okay? Am I really doing enough for God? Is he disappointed? We're still asking all these questions, and it's because we don't know the gospel. Like, we know how to get to heaven, but we don't know the gospel. And lastly, I'll just say, some people, they're teaching the Bible, but they're not teaching the gospel. And there is a difference.
What's the difference?
Well, you can teach Genesis to Revelation and every verse in it, and teach it, teach concepts about God and stories about David, and tell people, oh, don't you want to be like David, and don't you want to be like Daniel? And the answer is no. I got something better. The gospel is better on this side of the cross. Oh my goodness. I need to know I'm forgiven and free and close to Jesus and one with him. I need to know the gospel. And there are people that are still teaching you're a dirty worm and you're distant and you're dirty and God's mad at you, and that's not the gospel.
That is so good, and boy, do I agree. I was thinking as you were talking that we kind of design American Christianity to create hypocrites. I mean, we really do. It makes it easy to be a hypocrite. I think that if we wanted to have a revival, that we have to wear one of those clapboard signs listing our 10 biggest sins and come to church and watch everybody try to hide it. But you don't have to do that because everybody else is going to be hiding it too. So if you're a hypocrite, welcome to the club. I'm one too. And Jesus likes me a lot. 10% more than he likes you. Don't go away. We are coming back. For spending time with us. By the way, if you haven't yet subscribed to the weekly Key Life email, you're missing something important. You can use it to wrap presents in if you want to when you print it out. You certainly can't complain because it's free, but you may find that somebody telling you the gospel over and over and over again will make things a lot better. Go to keylife.org/subscribe.
Andrew, I love the structure of the book with humorous comments and also each chapter is relatively short. I mean, you can use them almost as short devotionals, thought for the day kind of things, which is really helpful. One of the areas, that maybe people struggle with, like, I don't know, Martin Luther, is like the book of James. And it seems like, what does he call it? The gospel of straw? Is that right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, kind of struggle with that. It seems like, is that really a part of the gospel? What's going on there?
My pastor did a series on James, and I said, well, I hope it's going to be good because I'm not going to be there.
Yeah, so my take on James is, yes, it's challenging. Yes, Martin Luther wanted to toss it out. But I think you got to realize first, the opening line, he's talking to the tribes of Israel that are scattered. So that's the audience for the message. And then secondly, it's filled with all kinds of calling them out, calling them to the carpet, saying you're a bunch of hypocrites. And he's talking about obedience and how you could keep the whole law. Look at you, bravo, you're doing great. But if you miss the law in one point, then you're guilty of all of it. So think of it in many regards, it's like the Sermon on the Mount, because James, the brother of Jesus, is taking up that same mantle. And I think what freaked Martin Luther out the most was faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
And, the idea that we would be, quote, justified by works. But I'm not flinching because I look at that chapter and I go, James, what do you mean by works? Are you literally saying that we're justified by helping the lady across the street and by giving enough money at church? Or is that what you're saying? And then I look at his examples and I'm like, no way. Look at his examples. He says, Abraham responded to God, put Isaac on the altar, and bam, he's justified. Then it says, Rahab opened the door for the spies, and bam, she was justified. So this is not some lifelong record of good works. It's literally just responding to God with a decision. And that's what we did at salvation. We opened the door. Hello, we opened the door like Rahab. Jesus stood at the door and knocked, and we opened it and we let him in, and that's how we're saved. And we offered ourselves like Abraham offered Isaac. We said, God, save me. I can't save myself. I'm offering myself to you. Save me. And so those actions, those responses, those decisions of faith, that's living faith. And I don't think that James meant, hey, you need a lifelong record of a bunch of good works to get right with God. So I think Martin Luther got it wrong. And I think James chapter 2, it jives perfectly with Paul, but he's just coming at it from a different angle.
Andrew, in the 50s and 60s, if you were part of in an evangelical church, you were anywhere on the spectrum between mildly legalistic all the way to just jump off the cliff legalistic. That was just what the church was, the evangelical church was back then. I don't think that's an overgeneralization. I grew up in that. I wouldn't trade my heritage for anything. I learned a tremendous amount, but nonetheless, that's what it was. Do you think that legalism is that not rampant, but is it as strong nowadays now in this generation as it was back then? Is it hidden a little bit better? Like my conversation with an elder in my church who said, we're a grace church, but we're not radical. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What is it about us that makes us grace but not radical? Are there things over here that we still have to, all the things that we have to do in order to be good Christians? What is the definition, in all of that? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, so I think there's just as much legalism today because there's just as much flesh today as there was decades ago. But I love how you expressed it. It's exactly my thoughts that it's hidden, that there's an undercurrent. So with the megachurch movement, we knew that, oh my goodness, we got to be more palatable, we got to be more accepted, we got to be able to float this message out there and reach the masses and draw them in and then not turn them off. So instead of it being overt legalism where we shout from the pulpit, instead we've got this undercurrent of guilt. Are you part of an accountability group? Are you part of a discipleship group? Have you moved from being a Christian to a true disciple? Have you joined a small group yet? Have you volunteered in the nursery yet? Are you keeping short accounts with God? Have you fallen out of God's will? We got all these expressions that people just sort of accept as as gospel. And another example would be, are you dying to self every day? Are you making sure that you're killing yourself? You got to kill yourself every day. Die to self, get rid of yourself. And yet God is saying, wait a minute, you're the new self. Don't listen to them. You're a new creation. You're the new self. You're not fighting a war against yourself. Oh my goodness, you're my child. I love you. I like you. You're a new creation. Yes, you're battling the flesh, but that's not who you are. You're not fighting yourself. Come on, I made you a new self. So there's a lot of ugly theology, I'll just say that. There's a lot of morbid belief systems, and there's just as much legalism today, but we've sort of sugar-coated it.
Do you think people are building empires on legalism?
Yes, I do. I think it brings in the money. I definitely think that it appeals to the flesh. Everybody goes to church expecting to feel bad. Everybody goes to church expecting to be, quote, convicted and improved, and therefore it feeds the flesh. And they say, well, you're helping me slap myself on the back like Martin Luther. I got to whip myself for an hour, and now I'm going to go back out and try again. And so it appeals to religious flesh.
Andrew, we're out of time, and I don't know where it went. We love you, and we love your message, and the fact that you don't shilly-shally. I suspect you get into trouble occasionally.
But I'm forgiven.
If you need a friend, a real friend, a friend will forgive you if you killed somebody, but a real friend will help you bury the body. And I just want you to know, you go, man. If you ever back off on this, I'm going to become a Buddhist. So my eternal security is based on you, so don't screw it up, okay?
I love you guys, and I'll do my best, Steve.
Andrew, you're great. The book is Gospel Zero, Reclaiming the Radical Message of Grace. It's not only profound, believe it or not, it's fun. Get this book, and you'll rise up and call me blessed for recommending it. Hour. I love to hear about grace. I really do. And I never tire of hearing of it. And that's a good thing, because it's not my fear of God that keeps me walking this. It's his love. And the reason I am so obedient and so spiritual and such a giant of the faith
is why?
I'm not even, we're not having thunderstorms in Orlando right now, but it really is. And by the way, I feel constrained to say something. As you know, we're all evangelicals, and that means some things that we think are important. But we recognize that a lot of people watch this program or listen to it on one of the radio stations, and you're not an evangelical, and I know what you're thinking, because I've been doing this a long time. You're thinking, well, I'm glad, boy, I listened to all that talk about Kathy saying the church she was raised in and how legalistic it was, and the people that have been hurt in the church. Not me. I'm a liberal, and I don't have that problem. Listen to me. You're worse than we are. You just have a different set of rules. Where do you think cancel culture came from? You just have a different set of rules, and you're going to rule me out. And at least we keep them we kick their posteriors, but we keep them in the church. In your church, you wouldn't even let me come. I just thought I'd say that. This is not a problem that just believers have. It's built in the flesh, universal in everybody. All of us are legalists at heart. All of us are Pharisees at heart. All of us are people who judge other people. Now, I don't know about you. I'm going to try to get better. If you don't,
Yes.
No, I can't say it. No. Who's going to be on next week?
Next week, we have a new author we've never had with us before. His name is Sam Storms, and his book is titled The Steadfast Love of the Lord, and he was highly recommended to us, but at this point in time, I can't remember who it was that recommended him. But it'll come to me.
Well, was it somebody you liked?
But I don't even remember that.
Oh, this is going to be awful.
I'll remember it in the middle of the night, and then it'll be an absolutely useless piece of information.
With a name like Storms, we could have trouble next week. And you ought to show up to find out if we do. We are going to be here next week, same time, same place. Hope you join us. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That gives you a wide, wide berth.
Throwing open the sash.